Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to One.Ace. My name is Lala, and for those of you who are new over here, just to let you know, One.Ace is a Japanese market insight series that is looking at the current trends and opportunities available in Japan. So, One.Ace is co-organized by three organizations, namely One&Co, where I am from. So, One&Co is a co-working space established by JR East. We're also co-organized by ACE. So ACE is one of the driving forces behind Singapore as an innovation island, and also co-organized by .D, a software venture builder with offices in Tokyo and Singapore. So just to give you a rough idea of who we are. Yes. So right now, let me hand over the time to Saken, who is our moderator for this event. Saken, if you will.
Hi, thanks, Lala. Thanks for the introduction. And hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining One.Ace session today. My name is Saken, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I'm with .D, a Japanese venture builder with operations in Japan and Singapore. Now, for today's session, as you may know, our focus will be on the go-to-market strategy in Japan. As you all may know, Japan is the third largest market in the world, and recently more and more startups have been interested in expanding their presence to Japan. However, entering the Japanese market has been famously difficult, whether it's due to its unique culture, business practices, or wide landscape. And many startups frequently ask us about the best way to plan their go-to-market strategy for Japan. Today, in order to answer some of those questions, we have invited three leaders and experts in the Japanese market. They have many years of experience helping startups and companies navigate through the challenges many foreign entities face or growing in the Japanese market. I would like to welcome our panelists, starting with Adam Clayton-Platt, Director and COO at Global DX Japan. Before Global DX, Adam was an entrepreneur in residence and then COO of Rainmaking Innovation Japan. Next, I would like to welcome Joshua Flannery, CEO of Innovation Dojo Japan. Before Innovation Dojo Japan, Joshua founded Innovation Dojo in Sydney and was then CEO of Rainmaking Innovation Japan. Finally, I'd like to welcome Nahoko Toyota, General Manager of Innovation Dojo Japan. She was previously at Rakuten and other global companies, both in Japan and abroad, and has many years experience helping startups at various stages of growth. Now, I'd like to give the panelists a minute or two to talk more about their current organizations before we jump into the main discussion. I'd like to hand it over to you, Adam, first.
Thank you very much, Saken, and hi, everybody. Thank you again for joining today. As Saken just kindly introduced, my name is Adam, and I've been living in Japan for 20 years. Before my introduction, though, I'd just like to say to One.Ace, thank you very much for this event. It's a really interesting time here in Japan over the last 20 years. I've got to say it's the most interesting. But still, in terms of foreign startups coming into the country, it's still relatively unknown. So hopefully this event will do wonders to help you demystify what is the Japanese market entry strategy for these days. And I believe you're in very good company too with Josh and Nahoko here as well. So yeah, hopefully we can provide value. As a brief introduction to myself, again, 20 years I've been here. I started my first business about 15 years ago. I started investing in renewable energy about 5 years ago, solar and wind. Started investing in startups about 3 years ago. And then 2 years ago, I met Josh, who you'll be introduced to soon. And he was running the Rainmaking Innovation in Japan and Startup Bootcamp Scale Osaka program. Really unique at the time. And it was a 3-month market entry accelerator for later stage companies, really to support their market entry and facilitate successful POCs with large corporations here. So yeah, 2 years I was working there. Last year I was COO, and we facilitated about 20 POCs with 7 large Japanese corporations. And the program itself was great, but in the Japanese market, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, but it's quite a unique cultural, and in terms of language issues as well, the hurdles are very high. There's not much English penetration here. So recently, especially after COVID, there are lots of events introducing foreign startups to Japanese corporates and matching them together. But in terms of real commercial outcomes, still not much happening, to be completely honest with you. And so I left Startup Bootcamp and founded Global DX to try to facilitate more real commercial outcomes. And namely, that means working closely with the corporate side, because in terms of speed, the problem is never the startup. The problem is largely structural with Japanese corporations, but also not understanding how to effectively collaborate with startups in terms of creating new businesses with them. So we serve Japanese corporations mainly through every step of their open innovation activities. And then after, which of course doesn't always happen, but after we hopefully reach an agreement between the startups that they're collaborating with, then we provide market entry support to the startups to support them to expand here. That's an important distinction, which I'm going to wrap on about today. Is you shouldn't even consider a market entry strategy until you've got your first customer here. But anyway, I'll talk about that in detail later on. So once again, thanks everybody. Looking forward to hopefully providing value.
Thanks, Adam. Over to you, Joshua.
Thanks, Saken, and thanks, Adam. Hi everyone. Great to see you. It's exciting that there is this interest from so many foreign startups now in Japan. For quite a while, it had sort of been put into the too hard basket, and everyone was looking towards the US. But it's refreshing and really good to see that Japan is back on the radar for you here attending today. So I'm originally from Australia. I started working in Japan environments or companies before I left Australia back in 1997. And since then, I've been traveling back and forth between Japan and Australia off and on, doing different things. The startup and innovation stuff really started when I brought a Australian ed tech company into Japan in the mid 2000s. And I made lots of mistakes and I made a lot of friends, and I like to think I learned from the experience too. And so since then it's sort of become a big part of my mission to try and help people not repeat those same errors. And so, as Adam mentioned, I've been working in rainmaking here in Japan, but before that, I founded this company called Innovation Dojo in Australia, and we've always been focused on working between Australia and Japan originally, with the likes of Hitachi or some of the top universities like Tokyo Institute of Technology. And most recently, we've set up our Japan subsidiary, and we have a big project with the Kobe city government. And we're focused on helping startups, both local domestic Japanese startups and also foreign startups like yourself, come into the market and do business in different ways. So whether that be connecting with corporates or some alternate ways that are emerging, or raising money, or there's a whole spectrum, which I think we will actually touch on it later. So I'll leave it at that. Just great to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. And Nahako-san, is there any other words you'd like to add about Innovation Dojo?
Right. Just introduce myself. My name is Nahoko and Toyota. As you can see from my surname, I'm very Japanese. I'm the only Japanese panelist for today. And yeah, good to meet you, everyone.
Great. Thank you all the panelists for introducing themselves. As the audience could probably see, they have all very extensive experience and a lot of experience working in the Japanese market. And really, I'd like to just kind of jump into the main discussion today. The first topic I'd like to approach is regarding product market fit. Product market fit is one of the first things startups need to consider, especially for a new market. Even for startups that already have an existing suite of products, it may be challenging to find product market fit in a new country. So the question I would like to explore right now is, how should startups test for product market fit in the Japanese market? Maybe I could start with you, Adam.
Sure, mate. Again, I already mentioned, finding your first customer in Japan should be the first goal. In terms of product market fit, there are lots of ways to do that lately, largely thanks to COVID again. An increasing number of programs, events, JETRO are very active in terms of supporting foreign startups with market entry information. They could very quickly give you a response as to whether you've got a possibility in Japan or not. Your local embassy, Enterprise Singapore, especially in Singapore, are very active in terms of supporting startups in. So you should leverage the existing tools to assess the interest that the Japanese companies have in you. A lot of the time, the companies we speak to who are actually doing well in the market originally were not considering the Japanese market, but they got contacted by a Japanese corporation, direct outreach. So yeah, there's a number of different channels that you can use, but leverage the existing opportunity to participate in the market entry accelerators or mentorship programs like Josh and Nahoko providing, or pitch events that we're doing. Leverage those to feel the audience out first. I don't think you need to do anything more than that, basically.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I really kind of agree with that. A lot of times we work a lot with the organizations you mentioned, whether it's JETRO, Enterprise Singapore, ACE, and there's a lot of different types of accelerators now in Japan. So definitely feel free to reach out to any of us to learn more about those. And maybe I'd like to pass it over to Joshua. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I agree with Adam's comments. I think in my mind, maybe what is a little bit different is just categorizing what activity is for what. So for me, like product market fit, is about customer validation and conducting those, almost a reflection of the lean startup methodology, where you're doing in-depth interviews and you're asking the right questions and looking for cues. Firstly, to validate that the same problem that you're solving is the one that the Japanese counterparts are having. And I think that's even a step maybe before you go and do one of the programs. You've probably now got options to go and do like validation just over Zoom now. It's easier than ever before and more realistic than ever before to be able to get some time from people in your target market who can actually speak English and who will actually be happy to speak to a startup, depending on if you're aligned potentially with their strategic interests too. So I think there is this little spot before you jump into a formal collaboration, which I see more as part of your business development, because there are costs, visible or not, involved in a free POC. And I think once you've done an initial validation, speaking to the companies and really seeing whether they have that exact same problem that you think they do, then you jump into those programs. And the way to do that is that's something we can help with, that sort of prior to a formal collaboration through the Kobe Startup Hub. But there are other organizations too. I know that the Shibuya government has a similar kind of concierge service too. So yeah, I think almost go back to how you started your company in your own market, and the difference being like what tools and networks and services can you use to reach the people you need to validate your business with first. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Saken.
Awesome. Thanks, Joshua. I think one of the things that you mentioned is pretty interesting about, let's say the uptick in Zoom meetings and, these type of web meetings. I'd like to kind of direct that question a bit to Nahoko-san, just kind of want to understand more about, how are web conferencing picking up in Japan? Is it, as Joshua said, is it a lot more easier now with the current circumstances for people to reach through web conference in Japan?
Yeah, Japanese companies are definitely more open to web conference now that it's kind of norm here in Japan. And I would like to add that, yes, this web conferencing acceptance is changing, but also the market itself is really dynamically changing right now. So maybe you have talked with some Japanese companies 2 years ago and you thought, maybe Japan is not for us, but try again and again, because over this 2-3 years, the Japanese company really changed the attitude toward helping startups from the this early stage of finding the product market fit. So yeah, on top of the availability of web conference, yeah, there are more opportunities here in Japan.
Definitely. That's really exciting to hear. And then sort of the next question we'd like to explore is related, of course, to product market fit. And especially even for us as a venture builder, we have seen many startups that have had a need to localize their product. And that's sort of the question I'd like to talk about next is how should startups localize their product to ensure better product market fit in the Japanese market? Maybe I could start with you, Naoko-san.
Well, be ready, I would say. So yeah, definitely, you never know how much localization you have to do until you start working with the company. So do your homework, of course, but once you come to Japan, through those programs that Adam and Josh mentioned earlier, you will learn a lot about where to change. And yeah, so yeah, throughout the experience, I would say.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. Always do your research beforehand. And maybe this is more of an open question to either Adam or Joshua, whoever wants to take it up. Do you have any kind of examples of product localizations that you could kind of share, or whether it's through your initiatives or other examples you've seen in the market? I'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah. Adam, do you want to go first?
Specific examples?
Or just have specific examples, or just anything that you have done, or anything that you've seen, or just in general, that's fine as well.
More than, if you want to point out specific examples, Josh, go for it. More than that, I was just going to talk about localization and the timing, but you go first.
Cool. Yeah, sure. So I mean, I've got a really relevant and recent example now. So part of our offering is to help to visualize the players in the Japan startup ecosystem via a digital social media platform. So it's kind of like a cross between a Facebook and a LinkedIn, but specifically for startups, mentors, investors, and the ecosystem players. So although, on the surface, something like that should theoretically be, as simple to localize as, getting some high quality translations done. You can never really guess how much further design changes are required. And, I think there are, loads and loads of stuff written about the different user experience expectations and what good design means in Japan versus, for example, Western countries and what have you. It is quite different, and beyond the stereotypes of the kind of Yahoo Japan example, where busy means Yahoo's done the work to take the thinking away for you, and Google being very, simple so that, it gives you the freedom. Beyond that level of difference, there's a lot of very small nuances in the design, and a lot of it is cultural. And I think it's to do with, fundamentally the positioning of supplier and vendor and customer and the provider of services that is really hard to guess, and it's kind of case by product too. So yeah, I mean, even though we've sort of been through it a lot with the startups we help, we're still learning each time we do something new too. So definitely don't expect that translation equals localization. That would be a point I'd put out there.
And if you allow me, I want to add to Josh's point. So I have been working with localization projects previously as well, helping like company like Oracle coming to Japanese market. And the tolerance toward that slight nuance differences is more strict right now in Japan because the Japanese startups quality is going up. So you have competitors who are really perfectly suited for the Japanese audience. So you have to be better at localization now. Yeah, sorry, just that.
No, I'm glad you add that. And glad that Josh also brought up about design. That's really important. We've seen super apps succeeding in some, areas. So glad you brought that up. Sorry, Adam, maybe we could jump to you about innovation, localization, the timing of that in the Japanese market.
Yeah. I was just going to mention, in terms of timing, like you can have your initial conversations and you can complete a POC, and the corporate that you're working with, the local partner that you're working with, can evaluate technology largely without having an actual localized product. So, and again, until you've got your first customer kind of close to a deal, I wouldn't even think it's necessary to actually consider full localization. But more importantly, after they evaluate your technology, after a POC, for example, they're going to need to do the internal hearing and get internal buy-in through the other departments. And what they're going to ask for are some very localized Japanese technical specification documents, etc. So don't think of like a pitch deck. You don't need to translate your pitch deck, but Japanese will ask for follow-up information that should be really quite comprehensive and detailed. That's worth getting translated so that you can take it through the departments, even if they don't understand English.
No, I think that's a really great point. And that there's a lot, little things that we have to be mindful of when entering the Japanese market. Great. No, I think that really covers localization and product market fit. And now I'd like to move into the next topic. So of course, the next topic I'd like to discuss is beyond the testing phase. Let's assume you already have the product market fit and a startup wants to go beyond the testing phase. How should startups then proceed to enter the Japanese market? What are some of the things that they should consider, and which mode of market entry usually works best for the Japanese market? Maybe we could start with you, Joshua.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I mean, it might be a bit of a frustrating answer, but I don't think one size fits all for this question. I think there are becoming some more well-trodden paths. So like the work that I've done previously with Adam, there's definitely, the pathway of doing a POC with a large corporate. And if you design that and manage that properly, it should become a pathway towards an actual business deal. If metrics are agreed up front and you have the right people in place to actually manage it smoothly with expectations met on both sides. But I think that there's also like some emerging ways. I think, sometimes there are different models of collaboration, which aren't necessarily straight out POC programs like what we've done. Sometimes there are research collaborations, which have a commercial twist. So I'm seeing in the work we're doing now, particularly in health, and sometimes kind of medical related projects, there's almost like mini consortiums where you'll have a research center, a clinic, a corporation, and a startup all working towards one particular outcome. And often it's almost like the same impact that a POC might have, but it's not. It's technically still a research project. The other thing that's changing is, the investment side of things. Interestingly, I wouldn't have said even 6 months ago that it was realistic for early stage, like pre on the market stage companies, like products not even on the market yet. I would say it's almost impossible 6 months ago to get a meeting with a VC. But we've seen now with some of the startups that we're helping that there are investors now looking that early in Japan. And given that it is still very heavily weighted towards the domestic startups, I think that's slowly changing as well. So even VCs are a pathway into corporates. Whether it's corporate venture capital, which is obvious because it's got the brand behind it, or actual standalone venture capital companies, they're often backed by the same corporates that want the the deal flow of those startups coming to them for projects too. So yeah, lots of different models. One more that I might add that I hadn't heard of until recently, which is the EOR model, or the employer of record model, which has come in. And so basically, there are companies here that without you having to set up a legal entity, on your behalf, they can hire a team and manage your payrolling and all the legal sort of side of things. So that you don't actually literally have to go ahead and hire that country manager directly yourself and navigate the tricky timing to do with the legal issues there. So yeah, it's a really interesting time for this kind of stuff. I'll stop there.
Okay. No, you actually bring up several interesting points. Yeah, I've dealt a lot with POCs, but this market kind of like entry this research angle is pretty interesting. And just to kind of add up on your ERO, employer record, that's quite, it's been quite popular in Southeast Asia, but it's quite exciting to see that it's also starting to become more common in Japan as well. I'll pass it over to Naoko-san now, just to kind of understand more about your experiences with these market entry strategies.
Right. For me, maybe I'll take the cultural angle to it. So Japan is such a trust-based country. So our culture is based on building personal trust. And if you have proven your product market fit, I assume that you already have relationships with some corporations and also local governments. Maximize those relationships is a really good point to start. Yeah, if you are treated with trust by those, key players, then other people, other companies will trust you. And yeah, it will be much easier for you to navigate after finding the product market fit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Naoko-san, for covering that important detail as well. And maybe Adam, just maybe some quick thoughts from you as well.
Sure. Yeah, everything you guys have said, totally spot on. Agree. I guess the local part is the most important. Building that trust with someone on the ground locally. Having someone on the ground locally who already has that trust. For example, a strategic investor, if it's a CVC or a local partner, depending on your market, that will vary. But having someone on the ground here to do that is essential in Japan. So don't try to go it on your own. Preferably have someone investing into an entity here or investing your rollout in Japan before you actually decide to proceed is a key point, I think. Also, in terms of CVC, international offices are often more receptive. Contact a Japanese CVC outpost in Silicon Valley, much easier to talk to than trying to contact the Honbu in the headquarters in Tokyo.
Absolutely. So thank you all for kind of like sharing about, I think there's a lot of things that we could discuss there. We could probably talk on for hours about that. But yeah, I'll move on to the next topic, which Joshua and actually Adam just now spoke about, which is about CVCs. So we have seen an increase in the corporate innovation scene in Japan, and as a result, more international startups are looking to enter the Japanese market to collaborate with Japanese corporates for co-innovation. How can startups position themselves to secure these POCs and deals with Japanese corporates? Maybe Naoko-san, I could start with you.
Well, be good and prove that you are the best. And I think sometimes it's challenging for someone from other countries to accept that you are kind of an outsider in a new market. So anyone who is being an outsider knows that, in order for you to be considered an option, you have to be 5 times or 10 times better, right? Sometimes so if you feel really frustrated, like, hey, we are 2 times better than the Japanese competitors and why they don't choose us, be patient and be better. Maybe it's a good mindset to have.
Definitely, I think it's not just about like your let's say your features or your product, but also about that mindset, being really kind of keep a perseverance up about that. It's a good point. Maybe Adam, I'd like to move over to you and ask your thoughts on that.
Sure. In terms of getting in front of corporates, I already mentioned at the start, there are pitch events, there are mentor programs like Kobe Startup Hub, where you can connect with mentors who can connect you, direct introductions to corporates. There are accelerator programs, etc. There's a full list. Hit me up via email or something and I can share more information. Jetro often has a lot of information available. There are many events now which require very little initial effort to get you in front of those corporates. Again, as Josh mentioned, though, a 3-month program is not something to be taken lightly. So you should consider before actually participating in a longer program.
Absolutely. And before I move to Josh, I just like to add the follow-up question. Kind of course, keeping the previous question in mind, is working with Japanese corporates for corporate innovation the best entry point for startups to enter the Japanese market? Just kind of your opinion on that.
Do you want me to take this, or are we still, is this open?
Yeah, it's still open.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
so I was still stuck on the last question.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think I mean, whether it's the best option or not, I think depends on so many things. I think it's more than what stage your startup is. It's actually dependent also as much on the corporate that you're speaking with, because they have different capabilities and different interests. Often a corporate that has a corporate venture capital arm will have, you know, a portfolio of different initiatives or interfaces with startups. And so, you know, the most visible one might be the CVC, but then they might also have an innovation team or a business development team that's actively sourcing and actively sort of trying to make new collaborations with startups. And then they also, depending on the company, might have an R&D team that almost looks a bit like the model I mentioned before when you have a university involved, except that it's a corporate funded research organization within a corporation. And they'll often have interests in trialing new technologies, you know, often not as the end game, but as part of something bigger that they're building internally. So that's an interesting one. I think in terms of sort of back to the last question, optimizing your sort of possibilities of something happening when there is a chance. You know, it's about a few things that maybe are quite common among potential Japanese partners. Things like simply appearing legitimate. So, you know, they want to know upfront how long you've been around, where your company is incorporated, what's the size of your team. Can you show a demo that's actually like high end? You know, do you have the capability to pass references? Then, you know, beyond that, you know, how unique are you? I'm sure Adam and I at least share some nightmares of how many times we've been in the conversation, and the question about who are your competitors comes up over and over again. So acknowledge that you have competitors, everyone does, but really do your work on finding out who the local competitors are in Japan. It's no point putting that beautiful slide where it positions you in the top right corner and all the other players on the other side if all of the other players mentioning are not Japanese and not in the Japanese market. So I could go on, but I'll stop there before I go too long. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. I think you bring up a lot of interesting points about, you know, a lot of times, you know, you have to be upfront about your competitors. I think it touches upon a few things that Nahoko-san mentioned about, you know, just being honest and being, you know, good about what you're doing. Yeah, so maybe Adam or Nahoko-san, do you want to add a bit more about your thoughts on, you know, whether it's the best option? You know, it's kind of an open question, whoever wants to take it up.
Ladies first, Nahoko.
Yes, you should work with Japanese corporation. They have budget, they have willingness to work with startups. They can be sometimes, you know, awkward, you know, they are not used to this, but it's worth it. So yeah, please.
Definitely.
Totally agree. There's an expression, I don't know if it's a real expression, but it's what I heard. So I'm going to call it an expression. They say if it didn't happen in Japan, it didn't happen. And then this is something that's so true with any Japanese company that you have a meeting with. They're like, oh, so, tell us about what you've done. And they're not talking about what you've done in Singapore. They need to have some example with a Japanese corporation in a foreign market, which is often easier, or the Japanese corporation in market. Otherwise, yeah, you're too early, not worth the cold calling or door knocking, definitely not worth it in Japan.
Yeah, definitely. That's also been sort of my experience as well. So I agree. I completely agree with your thoughts on that. Yeah, great. So I think that kind of sort of we could discuss now about corporate innovation as well. And the next thing I like to focus on is really, really important, of course, whether it's for startups or company, it's about sales and revenue. We all know that without sales and revenue, a startup or a company can't really survive. So the question I'd like to explore is, are there any differences in sales cycle in the Japan market compared to other markets in the region? Maybe we could start with you, Adam.
Sure. I can't really speak for other markets in the region because I've spent all of my adult life in Japan, to be honest. But from what I've heard from startups that I've worked with here, is that we always tell them it's slow, and then they always tell us it's slow everywhere working with corporates. So, but realistically, it might take 1 or 2 years in a foreign market. Expect 3 to 5 years for a real successful market entry in Japan. Just be prepared that it's probably slower than the market that you're working in. POCs is easy, but getting actual commercial outcomes, as I mentioned at the start, is hard. So don't think that an initial conversation leading to a POC means that you're just getting started. And really the real hurdles will come after the POC, which is why I mentioned having good localized technical specifications of documents and jumping through hoops when they tell you to, asking very tiny little detailed questions is very important, but also at the same time acknowledging that they might be time wasters. So it's kind of a fine balance that you have to play. You have to jump through the hoops to a certain extent, but also you have to be very, very patient and discerning. Sorry, long answer.
Absolutely. That really kind of resonates with my feelings about it as well. But if I could just add on a follow-on question to you, Adam, and I'll open the same question to Naoko-san and Joshua. Having said that, understand the challenges of the sales cycle. Do you have any tips for shortening the sales cycle in the Japanese market, or at least based on your experience?
Is this still my question?
We'll also hear the other kind of thoughts on that.
Cool.
Do you have anything?
You guys, I talked a lot already.
Okay, sure. Maybe I could pass it to you, Naoko-san. Do you have any advice on, for example, trying to shorten that sales cycle, or is it really challenging?
So maybe going back to my previous point, Japan being the trust-based society, what they are trying to evaluate during those long sales cycle is, can we trust you? It's as simple. It can be as simple as that. And one way, so in Japan, I often say Japan's sales cycle is really long and slow until it isn't. So in your presentation deck, we have previously worked with this company, and as the number grows on, of the logo that you have on that presentation deck, it gets shorter and easier, in my opinion. I don't know, what do you think, Josh and Adam?
Yeah, that's definitely something I would agree with. So yeah, it's almost like the chicken and the egg. So I mean, probably it's true in most markets when you're selling to a corporate. Often the power leading the decision making is risk mitigation. I think it's even more obvious and severe in Japan. So you're basically trying to give the managers that you're speaking to or trying to sell to weapons to go up the tree within their own organization and convince them and influence them that, actually it's not that much of a risk, and there is a significant benefit, just like our competitors have worked with them before. So I mean, that's nothing new, but I think it's maybe extreme here. So in terms of like how long the sales cycle is compared to other places, so I think it does depend on the type of product and industry, but I'll give you a real example. So if we're talking about a sales funnel, last year, I probably spent about 8 months speaking to about maybe 100 or so different innovation departments and business development departments of Japanese corporations. And probably about 20 of them, continued past the first initial meeting, but only say maybe 2 of them and eventuated in an actual deal. The positive side of that was there were probably significantly larger ticket sizes on the deals compared to say where I would, if I was selling that in Australia, where I'm from originally. So I guess there's this theme in Japan, which is, everything takes longer, but it's worth it. And it's worth it because it can be more lucrative. It can be harder to start a relationship, but in a funny way, harder to end it, which could be a good thing if you're looking to have a sustainable, repeatable relationship with a Japanese corporation. And so I think things like the case studies, not just the case studies that you'd have on your usual deck, but very in-depth case studies that show both what worked really well, which is probably what you've already got on your slide, but also what you learned from what didn't work. And I think that's just as interesting and almost builds more trust in a quicker way, so that you can say, look, we tried this part was great, we learned from this other part. And that kind of openness is really seen as a great trait in a founder generally by their Japanese counterparts. So I think there's a little bit of nuances around communication and openness, which are tricky to navigate. But generally, if you have a good product that works, it's better to show it warts and all, rather than just stick to what we might be more used to in a Western situation, where we would just show the highlights and push those.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joshua. I think there's a lot of points that you touch upon, but there's actually a follow-up question I'd like to ask, kind of related to what you've mentioned. You kind of talked about approaching innovations and business development departments. But upon that, who are the other key decision makers in corporates or companies that, let's say, that these startups should really approach, and how do they actually approach these decision makers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a bit of a conundrum, because there are these gatekeeper roles that are often in the innovation departments or business development departments, and often they are the ones that are the easiest to communicate with, because they tend to be, if there are any bilingual people in the organization, that's where they're going to be. And also they could be quite savvy. They're often have an interest in technology, and so they have that kind of combination of being easy to communicate with and probably being able to understand your product quite well. However, their roles tend to be gatekeeper only, and so once you actually go deeper into the project being realized or even started, you'll find that in most cases it's actually the business units that own the projects, and there isn't that kind of talent that you find in that first gatekeeping role with the language skills, or even like the experience collaborating with startups, let alone foreign startups. So it is really hard to, there are obviously every case is a little bit different, but generally, that's where that kind of repeated message, I think, from today is you do need help most of the way, whether it's help in that you end up having someone within your team on the ground, or by using a service provider or otherwise. It's no matter how good you are as an entrepreneur, there are things that are going to be beyond what being an entrepreneur means in terms of capability for doing effective business here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh, for inputs on that. Maybe I could also kind of pose the same question to Nahoko-san and Ada. Maybe starting with you, Nahoko-san. Do you have anything that you'd like to add about key decision makers and their approach with them?
Yeah, I sort of echoed what Josh said. So if you want to talk about how edgy your technology is, talk to the right person about it. So, that person who is kind of gatekeeper, who is tech savvy, tell that story of edgy technology to that person. And when you meet with the decision makers who are, above those gatekeepers, make sure to tell how trustworthy you are, a different story, maybe a different aspect of your business entity. So yeah, choosing the right story for each person you meet will be important.
Definitely. I think crafting that story and meeting those champions, evangelists is definitely always quite important in any market as well. Definitely. And then maybe Adam, is there anything that you'd like to also share on that?
Yeah, so as we've spoken about a few times, there are many opportunities for you to get in front of the corporates, the gatekeepers, as we've all mentioned. Another way to shorten the sales cycle, just referring to the last question as well, is just to be straight up and ask them if they can get the right departments in the room. I was reading about Fujitsu Accelerator, and they have a model where any of the startups that they deem as being high potential, they actually get all the different business unit decision makers in one room, the startup pitches, and if any one department puts their hand up expressing interest, they move to the next stage. I think that's what you should aim for in all of your conversations. Don't be shy to ask for, usually if you need to work with the product department or the marketing department, the innovation department might not speak your language. Don't be shy to ask, because if they don't gather the right departments in the room, it's a good way to discern, and this could be a time waster. Move on to the next.
No, thanks. Yeah, thank you for really adding that on. I think that's really important, just to kind of getting clear to the point. I think that's important even when working with Japanese clients. I think that really kind of covers a lot of the questions that we wanted to discuss during our main discussion. There were actually some questions from the audience themselves that we would like to address right now with time permitting. So one of the questions that came from the floor, and I'll sort of make this an open question. The first question is, how open are Japanese banks to work with international startups? I'm not sure if anyone wants to kind of address that.
The answer is not very, to be completely honest with you. Japanese banks, the more mega you get, the less or the more risk averse they get. Working with international startups, the regional banks are starting to get more proactive and even offering programs where they, what's the word, like a subsidy or a subsidy, right? For POC work with corporates and foreign startups. But this is very early stage talk still. I haven't heard of any Japanese banks investing in international startups. Do you guys have any, Josh, Nahoko? Any good stories?
Does this mean that they are selling some product for Japanese banks?
Right. I think it could be either one, whether it's for corporate innovation or whether they're the clients. I think maybe the question is more about corporate innovation, I would say. Mm-hmm. More, let's say, partnerships. Mm-hmm.
Right. So for example, I worked for a company called Rakuten in Japan, and they had a banking service within, it's like a conglomerate, with different businesses. And we were trying to create open business model within the company, but the struggle was always around banking business or security businesses because of the regulation reasons. So if you can work around that, maybe there is a possibility. Fintech being really active in Japan currently. So yeah, but research and localization, if you can, spend some time and effort and money on that, there's a chance.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you touched upon security. Yeah, it's definitely a huge issue to consider when working with these large institutions. And Joshua, is there anything that you'd like to add onto that?
Yeah, look, I think fintech is bubbling, but for some reason it's being kept for a long time until now, an arm's length from the core business of the major banks. So you still walk in as a retail customer and see paper, where in other Asian countries that's gone 5 years ago. That said, there are a lot of startup related initiatives that are either sponsored or indirectly supported by banks. So, there are a number of co-working spaces that are, sponsored by banks. There are accelerators, where the bank may or may not be actually actively in there to collaborate, but they're paying to be a part of it, to see what's coming through. So they're sort of the sleeping giants in a way of the players. I know that some banks are doing accelerators under their own brand, but as far as I can tell, it tends to be more arm's length projects. So projects that maybe their customers have interests in, their corporate customers, or more general technology like cybersecurity, which isn't just a pure, how do we fix how slow the Japan retail banking services are, things like that, which are fundamentally haven't been broken into. But I have hope that it will come. And when it does, there'll be just mountains of opportunity for the startups.
Sorry, can I just clarify? I misread the question. I think you're talking about loaning money to international startups, which never happens. But yeah, in terms of banks, there's actually quite a few of them in Silicon Valley as well, making investments in fintech. And I think Tokyo is one of the fintech capitals of the world in terms of investing in these kinds of technologies. Just don't go to ask for a loan at a Japanese bank.
Yeah, I think that covers the question quite well. I think one of the things that came from the audience is more of a kind of a comment, and I'd like to kind of hear any of the panelists, if you would like to kind of comment on that as well. The comment was, of course, that working with corporates, a lot of times you might have to adhere to their compliance practices, which could be sometimes, slow, a bit more, a bit slow, and then it might not be really suited for startup agility. Do you have any thoughts on that, especially in Japan, how that relates to Japan?
You want me to take that?
Sure. I know it's open.
Yeah, I think it's the same anywhere. I think startups have the same problems adapting to the speed of working with corporates anywhere. It's kind of it's almost no different in Japan. It can be a little bit more picky. Sorry, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it's a tricky because as you mentioned, I think it's quite similar. Mm-hmm. Now, because
there are companies that are really active, and there are companies who are really closed. And one way to distinguish those is look at those accelerators, landing pads for international startups, and what companies are sponsoring those programs, and also collaborating with local governments on startup support schemes. And by doing that, you will know very easily, like these companies appear every time or never appear.
So do a bit of research to find the ones that seems to be more receptive of those. So since we're running out of time, let me just if each of the panelists could just share like one final comment. I think before we close the panel, I would just also like to help our audiences in the next step. So whether it's some final thoughts, but also if there's any networks or resources that you recommend startups to go to for Japan's market entry, that'll be kind of the closing thoughts. Maybe I could start with you, Naoko-san.
Yep. So I would definitely say that so as we said, to enter our Japanese market is challenging but worth it. So we want to make it as smooth as possible. And of course, our recommendation is using our services. So we run Korea Startup Hub and Global Mentorship Program. And I think OneDotAce will provide that presentation deck after this presentation, so you can take a look at it. But use resources, please. Don't come to Japan and just test water. We will help you. So use those services.
And maybe next, Adam, to you.
Sure, mate. Hit me up via email. It's probably easier, but Jetro is great. Your embassy is great. Kobe Startup Hub is great. We're putting on an event in Dubai in December that you're all welcome to join. Startup Bootcamp, KGAT Plus in Kyoto, Plug and Play, 500 startups. There are so many different programs out there. A little bit of research or just hit us up and we can point you in the right direction.
Awesome. And final thoughts from you, Joshua.
Yeah, completely. So I think I agree with what both Adam and Nahoko said. I think maybe the first step is to look at, as a company in Singapore now, how are you deciding what are your priority markets? And if you have a clear understanding of that, and Japan still comes out on top in terms of the size of the market and the potential there on paper, then definitely, it is worth pursuing, and there are ways to do it. You always hear that it's hard, and it is hard if you don't have the right help. But, with players like, what Adam's doing and what we're doing and all the other sort of JETRO government and private sector support available, it is really more accessible than it used to be. So go in just knowing that it won't be easy, but if the market is aligned with your strategy, it will be worthwhile.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your thoughts on that final question. And for the audience, I think we have learned many insights and strategies for entering the Japanese market through our discussions today. I'd like to thank our guests again for their time today, and I hope we were able to answer some of your questions about the Japanese market. It was a pleasure being your moderator today. I'd like to pass it back to your host, Lala. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, speakers. Thank you so much, Sakin, for this very exciting discussion. Okay, so before we end off today's session, I would just like to share some information on our second last session for this season 1. So if you can see my screen, next session for OneDotAce, we will be having a sharing on Japan startup ecosystem, and this will be prefecture focused. So right now we have asked 3 prefectures on board, and we'll give you more information about this in the days to come. So for this session, it will happen on the 26th of November, and that's a Friday, same time, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. Right. So with that said, thank you so much for spending your lovely afternoon here with us. Thank you so much for coming down to listen to what our speakers have to say. I hope that the information that you got from us today is useful. Just before you go, can I just ask for a little help for you to just do a little poll for us, and then after that you may leave. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good Friday. Have a good lunch. Thank you.